The thing about being trapped is that you never realize you're trapped until it's already too late. When snow starts falling and the world turns white, something changes in the silence. Something that waits. I was 28 when I learned that some people don't freeze to death in snowstorms. Sometimes they just disappear into the white, and what comes back isn't quite the same thing that went in. My name is Marcus Chen, and in February of 2023, I was driving back to Marquette, Michigan after a sales conference in Green Bay. The forecast had mentioned flurries, maybe 3 to 4 inches overnight. Nothing that would stop someone who grew up in the Upper Peninsula. I left the hotel around 6 p.m., figuring I'd beat the worst of it and be home by 10 o'clock. Maybe catch the end of whatever game my roommate was watching. By 7:30, I knew the forecast had lied. The snow came down so thick it looked like someone had draped a sheet over my windshield. I was crawling along Highway 41 at maybe 15 miles per hour, both hands locked on the wheel, my headlights doing absolutely nothing except showing me more white. The road had emptied out completely in the last 20 minutes, which should have told me to pull over and wait. But the next town was supposedly only 8 miles ahead, and I convinced myself I could make it. That stopping on the shoulder in zero visibility was more dangerous than pushing forward. That kind of thinking gets people killed. My car hit a patch of black ice hidden under fresh powder, and suddenly I was spinning. Once, twice, maybe 3 times I lost count. The Toyota slid sideways off the road and dropped into a shallow ditch with a crunch that rattled my teeth. When everything stopped moving, I just sat there breathing hard, doing that mental check you do after a crash. Everything worked. Neck, spine, arms, legs. The airbags hadn't deployed, which meant the impact wasn't as bad as it felt. I tried reversing out, but the wheels just spun uselessly against the ice. I was stuck at an angle that gave me no traction whatsoever, and the snow was already piling up against the driver's side door fast enough that I could watch it rising through the window. My phone showed one flickering bar of signal that disappeared completely when I tried to dial 911. This stretch of highway was notorious for dead zones, something everyone knew but nobody worried about until the moment they actually needed help. The temperature inside the car started dropping immediately. I kept the engine running for heat, watching the fuel gauge and calculating. Maybe 2 hours if I was careful. Maybe 3 if I rationed. The wind outside was screaming now, shaking the entire car, sending snow swirling past the windows in hypnotic patterns that made my eyes hurt to follow. I tried my phone again, holding it up toward the ceiling, then toward each window, searching for a signal that simply wasn't there. My plan was simple. Wait for another car to pass, flag them down, get help. Except no cars were passing. The road remained empty, swallowed by the storm, and every minute that ticked by made me feel like I'd slipped off the edge of the world. Nearly an hour passed before I saw movement. Not headlights, movement. Through the curtain of snow in front of my car, something was walking along the highway. A dark shape moving slowly from left to right, hunched against the wind. My first thought was relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. Another stranded driver. Someone I could team up with, share body heat, figure out a plan together. I hit the horn, 3 long blasts that got swallowed almost immediately by the storm. The shape stopped. Then it turned toward my car and started walking in my direction. As it got closer, I could make out more details through the snow. It was a woman, wearing what looked like a long coat that hung past her knees. Her hair was dark and hung loose around her face, whipping in the wind. She moved with this strange, unhurried pace that seemed wrong for the conditions, like she was taking an evening stroll instead of trudging through a blizzard. She walked right up to my driver's side window and stopped about 3 feet away, just standing there. The snow was coming down so hard I couldn't see her face clearly, just a pale oval shape where her features should have been. She didn't wave, didn't motion for me to roll down the window, just stood there perfectly still, while the wind howled around her. I rolled my window down about 2 inches, just enough to talk through, and the cold that rushed in felt like it was cutting into my skin. I called out to her, asked if she needed help, asked if she had a phone that worked. She didn't respond, didn't even move, just kept staring at me through that gap in the window with what I was starting to realize weren't eyes at all, just dark hollows where eyes should have been. My throat went dry. I told her I was stuck, that I'd been trying to get a signal, that maybe we should try walking to find help together. My voice came out shaky, but I kept talking because the silence between my words was worse than anything. She tilted her head to one side, slow and deliberate, like a dog hearing a strange sound. Then she reached up and pressed both hands flat against my window. Her palms were blue. Not pale from cold, but actually blue, the color of something that had been frozen solid for a very long time. I could see the individual lines in her palms pressed against the glass, and they looked wrong somehow, too deep, carved too sharply, like someone had traced them with a knife. I jerked back in my seat, my hand fumbling for the window control. The glass slid up, but her hand stayed pressed against it even as the gap closed. She didn't pull back, didn't react at all, just kept those blue palms flat against the window while I watched frost spread outward from where she was touching, creeping across the glass in intricate patterns that looked almost deliberate. Then she spoke. Her voice came through the closed window like it was being whispered directly into my ear, bypassing the glass entirely. "Let me in where it's warm." I shook my head, my heart slamming against my ribs. She hadn't moved her lips. I was sure of it. Her face had remained completely still, but I'd heard those words as clearly as if she was sitting in the passenger seat. "Let me in where it's warm," she said again, and this time her head tilted to the other side, that same slow, mechanical movement that made my skin crawl. I started the car, even though I knew I was stuck. The engine revved, the wheels spun, and the Toyota rocked slightly but didn't move. The woman didn't flinch at the noise, didn't step back. She just kept standing there with her hands pressed against my window, and I realized the frost spreading from her palms had covered almost the entire pane of glass now. I couldn't see through it anymore, couldn't see anything except white ice and the vague dark shape of her on the other side. I cranked the heat up as high as it would go, pointing every vent at the driver's side window. The frost started to melt, slowly, revealing her face again in sections. What I saw made me stop breathing. Her eyes were completely white, not clouded with cataracts, not rolled back in her head, just white all the way through like someone had replaced them with smooth stones. Her skin had the same blue-gray tone as her hands, and there was something wrong with the way it sat on her face, loose and saggy in places, tight and stretched in others, like it didn't quite fit properly. She smiled. Her teeth were perfect and white, and too many of them, rows stacked behind rows, filling her mouth in a way that human teeth absolutely should not. "Let me in where it's warm," she said a third time, and now her voice sounded like it was coming from multiple directions at once, layered and echoing inside my car. I laid on the horn, holding it down, the sound blaring out into the storm. She didn't react, didn't even blink those white stone eyes, just kept smiling with too many teeth while the frost on my window started spreading again despite the heat blasting at it. That's when I saw the second shape. Behind her, maybe 20 feet back, another figure was standing in the middle of the highway. Then a third appeared to the left, then a fourth, all of them women, all of them wearing long coats, all of them perfectly still in the howling wind. They'd formed a loose circle around my car, and as I watched, they all turned their heads in unison to face me. The woman at my window pressed her face against the glass now, those white eyes inches from mine, her breath fogging up the inside of my window even though she was outside the car. The fog formed words: warm, warm, warm. I scrambled into the back seat, as far from the window as I could get. All around the car now, I could see their shapes pressing closer, their hands reaching toward the windows, their faces appearing in every direction. The frost was spreading across every pane of glass, creeping across the windshield, the back window, turning my car into a frozen tomb. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Signal. 1 bar, but it was there. I dialed 911 with shaking hands, and miracle of miracles, it connected. The dispatcher's voice crackled through, asking me to state my emergency, and I was trying to explain where I was when the woman's face appeared in the back window directly behind me. She was inside the car, not all the way inside, just her head and shoulders, pushing through the glass like it was water instead of solid material. Her white eyes locked onto mine, and that smile full of too many teeth stretched wider, impossibly wide, splitting her face nearly in half. I screamed and threw myself toward the front seat. My hand hit the door handle, and I fell out into the snow, the phone dropping somewhere in the car. The cold hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't stop moving. I ran, stumbling through knee-deep drifts, away from the car and those things surrounding it. Behind me, I heard glass shattering, all the windows of my Toyota exploding at once, and then this sound like wind rushing into a vacuum, a huge hollow whoosh that made my ears pop. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out, until I collapsed face first into a snowbank and couldn't get up anymore. The cold was so intense it stopped hurting and just felt like nothing, like my body was disappearing piece by piece. That's where the state trooper found me 40 minutes later, following up on the 911 call. He said when he arrived at my car, all the windows were blown out from the inside, and the interior was coated with a layer of frost so thick he couldn't see the seats. But there was no one around, no footprints except mine leading away from the vehicle. He asked me what happened, what I saw, and I tried to tell him, but the words wouldn't come out right. Everything I said sounded crazy even to my own ears. Women with white eyes and too many teeth. Figures appearing in the storm. Someone pushing through glass like water. He nodded and said hypothermia does strange things to the mind. That I was lucky to be alive. That I shouldn't have left the car. I spent 3 days in the hospital recovering from severe frostbite. Lost 2 toes on my left foot and the tip of my right pinky finger. Could have been worse, the doctors said. Could have lost a lot more. I sold the Toyota as soon as it got towed out of that ditch, even though the insurance company offered to fix the windows. I couldn't stand looking at it. Couldn't stop seeing the frost patterns spreading across the glass. Couldn't stop hearing that voice asking to be let in where it's warm. Sometimes, late at night when the wind picks up, I hear that voice again. Not outside, inside my apartment, coming from my bedroom, from my closet, from right behind my shoulder. Always asking the same thing in that layered, echoing tone. Let me in where it's warm. I moved to Arizona 6 months later. Haven't seen snow since. Never plan to again. Story 2. The Smiling Passenger. Not everyone who offers you a ride wants to take you somewhere safe. Sometimes they just want to take you somewhere no one will find you until spring thaw. My name is Rachel Kowalski, and I was 24 years old when I learned that lesson on a frozen highway outside of Duluth, Minnesota. It was the first week of January 2024, and I'd been visiting my boyfriend's family for the holidays. The visit had gone badly, ended with a fight that made me leave 3 days early, catching whatever ride I could get back to Minneapolis. Bad decision number 1. I posted in a rideshare group online, and within an hour, a guy named Derek messaged me saying he was headed to the cities that afternoon and had room in his SUV. His profile looked normal enough. Married, 2 kids, worked in IT, had good reviews from other riders. I told him I'd pay for gas, and we arranged to meet at a Perkins parking lot off Highway 35. Bad decision number 2. Derek pulled up in a silver Chevy Suburban that looked brand new, all gleaming chrome and tinted windows. He was exactly what his profile suggested. Middle-aged, slightly overweight, wearing a polo shirt and dad jeans. He smiled when I climbed in, helped me put my suitcase in the back, and asked if I wanted to stop for coffee before we got on the highway. I said yes. Bad decision number 3. The drive started fine. We made small talk about the holidays, about the weather, about nothing in particular. He seemed nice enough, if a little quiet. Every so often, I catch him glancing at me in that sideways way people do when they think you're not looking, but I figured he was just being polite, checking to make sure I was comfortable. About 40 minutes into the drive, it started snowing. Light at first, just flurries dancing across the windshield, but it picked up fast. Within 20 minutes, we were in a full whiteout, the kind where the road and the sky become the same shade of gray-white and you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Derek slowed down, which seemed smart. He turned on the hazards and kept both hands on the wheel, his eyes locked forward. I remember thinking I was lucky to be with someone cautious, someone who knew how to handle winter driving. That thought lasted about 10 more minutes. We were on a stretch of highway that I didn't recognize. Fewer lanes than there should have been, no other cars in sight. The snow was coming down so hard now that the wipers could barely keep up. Derek cleared his throat and said we should probably get off the highway, find a place to wait out the storm. I agreed. He took the next exit, which led to a narrow 2-lane road that cut through dense forest. The trees pressed in close on both sides, their branches heavy with snow that dumped onto the road in thick clumps. I asked him where we were going, and he said there was a truck stop about 5 miles ahead where we could grab food and wait for the weather to clear. 5 miles came and went, then 10, then 15. No truck stop, no buildings at all. Just trees and snow and that narrow road getting narrower, more rutted, less maintained with every mile. I asked again where we were going. My voice came out sharper this time, edged with worry I couldn't quite hide. Derek didn't answer right away. He just kept driving, both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. Then slowly he smiled. Not a friendly smile. Something else. Something that made my stomach drop. "We're going somewhere quiet," he said. His voice hadn't changed at all. Still calm, still pleasant, like he was telling me about his favorite restaurant. "Somewhere no one's going to bother us." I told him to turn around. He shook his head and said we'd come too far for that. I told him I wanted to go back to the highway, that I'd changed my mind about the ride, that I'd call someone else. He laughed, a soft chuckle that barely qualified as sound, and said my phone wouldn't work out here anyway. I checked. He was right. No signal. Not even one bar. My heart started hammering hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I glanced at the door, checking if it was locked. It wasn't, but jumping out of a moving vehicle into a snowstorm seemed like trading one death for another. Derek must have noticed me looking because he reached over casually, almost lazily, and engaged the child locks with a soft click. Now even if I pulled the handle, the door wouldn't open from the inside. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, still smiling, still calm. "I just want to talk, get to know you better. You seemed lonely in your post, like you needed someone to listen." I told him I wasn't lonely, told him to unlock the doors, told him I'd scream if he didn't stop the car immediately. He turned to look at me then, taking his eyes off the road for the first time since we'd left the highway. His smile got wider. "There's no one out here to hear you scream," he said. "That's kind of the whole point." The Suburban hit a patch of ice and fishtailed slightly, but Derek corrected without even looking at the road. His eyes stayed locked on mine for another 3 seconds, for 5, before finally turning back to the windshield. I was trapped in a car with a stranger, on a road I didn't recognize, with no phone signal and no way to open the doors. Every horror story I'd ever heard about rideshare apps flashed through my mind at once. All those warnings I'd ignored because I needed a cheap ride and he had good reviews. The road got worse. We were on something that barely qualified as a path now. Just two tire tracks cutting through unplowed snow with forest pressing in so close the branches scraped against both sides of the Suburban. I had no idea how Derek even knew where he was going. There were no signs, no markers, nothing but white and trees and that endless narrow tunnel. He started talking again, asking me questions. How old was I? Did I have family nearby? Did anyone know I was catching a ride with him? The questions felt like he was checking boxes on a list he'd memorized, making sure all his bases were covered. I lied. Told him my boyfriend knew exactly who I was riding with, that I'd sent him screenshots of Derek's profile, that people were expecting me to check in every hour. I don't know if he believed me, but it was the only card I had to play. Derek's smile faded a little at that. He nodded slowly, like he was thinking it over, weighing his options. Then he said, almost to himself, "That's okay. We have time to figure it out. We have time." Those 3 words made my blood run cold because they meant he'd already decided something. Already made a plan that involved me in a way I absolutely did not want to be involved. I spotted something ahead, through the trees. A structure, dark and low to the ground, could have been a cabin or a shed or an old barn. Derek slowed the Suburban as we approached, and I realized with horror that he was pulling toward it, angling the vehicle off the already narrow road toward this building that looked abandoned and forgotten. This was it. This was where he'd been taking me the whole time. Somewhere no one would find me until the snow melted in April. I made a decision, probably a stupid decision, but the only one I had left. I unbuckled my seatbelt as quietly as I could, trying not to let the metal buckle click too loudly. Derek was focused on navigating through the deep snow, both hands on the wheel, that smile completely gone now, replaced with concentration. When the Suburban slowed to maybe 5 miles per hour, trying to find a path to the building, I threw myself toward the front and grabbed the steering wheel with both hands. I yanked it hard to the left, pulling as hard as I could. Derek shouted, tried to fight me for control, and the Suburban lurched sideways. The front tire hit something under the snow, probably a rock or a fallen branch, and the whole vehicle tipped. Not all the way over, just enough that the passenger side lifted off the ground for a second before crashing back down at an angle. The impact jolted both of us. Derek's head hit the driver's side window with a crack that sounded sickeningly wet. He slumped forward against the steering wheel, not moving, blood running down from a gash above his temple. I didn't wait to see if he was unconscious or dead. I scrambled over his lap, popped the child lock off manually, and shoved the driver's side door open. The cold hit me instantly, but I didn't care. I ran. The snow was up past my knees in places, and I had no coat, just the hoodie I'd been wearing inside the heated car. My suitcase was still in the back of the Suburban, but there was no time to get it. I ran toward the trees, away from that dark building, away from Derek, following my own logic that told me the road had to be somewhere nearby. Behind me, I heard the Suburban's engine still running. Then I heard a door slam. Then I heard Derek's voice, shouting my name, telling me to come back, that he wasn't going to hurt me, that I'd misunderstood everything. I kept running. Branches tore at my face and my arms. The snow soaked through my jeans and my shoes, and within minutes I couldn't feel my feet anymore. But I kept moving, crashing through the forest, putting as much distance as I could between myself and that voice still calling my name. I have no idea how long I ran. Could have been 10 minutes, could have been an hour. Time stopped making sense. Everything was white and cold in pain. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. But I didn't stop until I saw lights ahead. Real lights. Electric lights. A gas station, glowing like a beacon through the trees. I stumbled out of the forest and into the parking lot, barely able to stand. An elderly man was pumping gas into his pickup truck, and when he saw me, his eyes went wide. He rushed over, asking what happened, if I was hurt, but I couldn't form words. I just pointed back at the trees and collapsed against his truck. He got me inside the gas station, wrapped me in his coat, and called 911. The state police arrived 20 minutes later, and I told them everything. Described Derek, described the Suburban, described the building he'd been taking me toward. They found the SUV about 3 miles into the forest, tipped at an angle exactly where I'd crashed it. Derek was gone. The vehicle was registered to a Derek Paulson from Bloomington, but when they tracked down that address, they found it belonged to an elderly couple who'd never heard of any rideshare arrangement. The Derek Paulson whose profile I'd seen didn't exist. Inside the Suburban, they found zip ties in the glove compartment, a roll of duct tape, a hunting knife, plastic sheeting, and in the very back, hidden under a blanket, a Polaroid camera and a shoebox full of photos. Photos of women, different women, some smiling, some screaming, some just staring at the camera with empty eyes. The police wouldn't tell me much about the photos, but the detective who interviewed me said I was lucky. Said the profile I'd found had been used 3 times before, always picking up young women traveling alone, always during snowstorms. They never caught him. The Suburban was stolen, the plates were fake, and the fingerprints inside matched no one in any database. Whoever Derek really was, he vanished into that forest and never resurfaced. I moved to Phoenix a month later. Couldn't stand Minnesota anymore. Couldn't stand the snow. Couldn't stand the idea of winter. I don't do rideshares. Don't accept rides from strangers. Don't trust smiling men in silver SUVs who seem just a little too eager to help. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear his voice calling my name through the trees, patient and calm, telling me to come back, that he's not going to hurt me, that I misunderstood everything. Story 3. The House That Breathed. Some structures shouldn't exist during snowstorms. They attract things that have been waiting in the cold for a very, very long time. My name is Thomas Berkeley, and I was 31 when I spent the night in a farmhouse that I'm absolutely certain was never meant to shelter the living. This happened in rural Vermont during the blizzard of February 2022. One of those storms that shut down entire counties and left people stranded for days. I was driving from Burlington to my sister's place in White River Junction, a trip I'd made dozens of times without incident. The forecast mentioned snow, but nothing that seemed serious. Light accumulation, they said, maybe 4 inches by evening. Standard Vermont winter stuff. By 4 p.m., there were already 8 inches on the ground, and it was coming down so hard I couldn't see the hood of my Jeep. The highway had turned into a parking lot, completely gridlocked with abandoned vehicles and jackknifed semis. After sitting still for 2 hours with my fuel gauge dropping toward empty, I made the decision to get off at the next exit and find somewhere to wait out the storm. The exit led to a rural route I'd never been on before, barely plowed, lined with dense forest that pressed in close on both sides. I drove slowly, my headlights barely cutting through the white chaos, looking for any sign of civilization. A gas station, a diner, anything with lights and heat and people. What I found was the farmhouse. It appeared suddenly through the curtain of snow, maybe 30 yards off the road. A huge old Victorian structure with a sagging porch and dark windows. No lights on anywhere, but I could see smoke rising from the chimney, thin and gray, whipped away by the wind almost immediately. Someone was home, or at least, someone had been home recently enough to light a fire. I pulled into the long driveway, my Jeep's tires crunching through snow that hadn't been touched by any other vehicle. The house loomed larger as I approached, 3 stories tall with a tower room jutting up on the left side and a wraparound porch that looked like it might collapse under the weight of accumulated ice. I parked as close to the porch as I could and killed the engine. The The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, broken only by the howl of wind and the ticking of my cooling engine. I sat there for a moment, debating whether this was a good idea, before finally grabbing my phone and my emergency kit and stepping out into the storm. The cold was vicious, cutting through my coat like it wasn't even there. I hurried up the porch steps, which creaked alarmingly under my weight, and knocked on the front door. 3 solid raps that echoed inside the house. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time, and called out that I was stranded, that I just needed to use a phone or wait out the storm somewhere warm. My voice got swallowed by the wind almost immediately. Still no answer. I tried the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked, but it turned smoothly and the door swung inward with a long, drawn-out creak that sounded like something from a horror movie. "Hello," I called into the darkness. "Anyone home?" The interior of the house was pitch black except for a faint orange glow coming from somewhere deeper inside, probably the fire I'd seen smoking from the chimney. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the entryway. The place looked abandoned, but recently abandoned, like someone had left in a hurry. There was furniture covered in white sheets, portraits hanging on the walls with their faces turned backward, and a thick layer of dust covering everything except the hardwood floor, which showed footprints. Fresh footprints, multiple sets, crisscrossing the room in no particular pattern. "Hello," I called again, louder this time. "I'm sorry for coming in, but I'm stranded and I need help." Silence. Then, from somewhere above me, I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps crossing the ceiling, moving from one end of the house to the other. Relief flooded through me. Someone was home after all. "Hey!" I shouted toward the ceiling. "I'm downstairs. I need help." The footsteps stopped. Then they started again, faster now, moving toward what must have been a staircase. I followed the sound, my phone's flashlight beam bouncing off walls papered with faded floral patterns that might have been pretty 50 years ago. I found the staircase in the main hallway, wide and grand with a banister that curved up into darkness. The footsteps were coming down now, and I could see a shape descending, just a dark silhouette against the slightly less dark background. "Thank God," I said. "I'm so sorry to barge in like this, but the roads are completely blocked and The shape reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped into the thin beam of my flashlight. It was a woman, elderly, maybe 70 or 80, wearing a long nightgown that looked like it belonged to a different century. Her hair was white and hung loose around her shoulders, and her face was pale, almost translucent in the dim light. But it was her eyes that made me stop talking mid-sentence. They were completely black. Not just the pupils, the entire eye, from edge to edge, black as oil. She smiled at me and her teeth looked wrong. Too long, too sharp, filed down to points. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice was soft, almost motherly, but there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl. "The house doesn't like visitors during storms." I took a step backward, my hand tightening on my phone. "I'm sorry, I'll leave. I just need to." "Too late for that," she interrupted, still smiling. "You're inside now. The house won't let you go until it's had its fill." Behind her, I heard more footsteps, descending the stairs, multiple sets, moving in unison, a steady rhythm that sounded almost like drums. More shapes appeared in the darkness. 3 of them, then 4, then 5. All women, all wearing the same old-fashioned nightgowns, all with those same black eyes and sharp teeth. They formed a semicircle around me, blocking the path back to the front door. "The house gets hungry during storms," the first woman said, taking a step closer. "All that cold outside makes it crave warmth. Living warmth." I turned and ran. Not toward the front door, they had that blocked, but deeper into the house, down a hallway that led toward the orange glow I'd seen earlier. Behind me, I heard their footsteps following, not running, just walking at that same steady pace, like they knew I had nowhere to go. The hallway opened into a massive living room with a fireplace that took up almost an entire wall. The fire was burning, huge flames dancing and crackling, but the room was freezing. My breath came out in clouds, and frost covered the windows despite the inferno blazing just 10 feet away. There were more of them in here. Women, children, even a few men, all with those black eyes, all watching me with expressions that weren't quite human. They stood around the perimeter of the room, perfectly still, not breathing, not blinking. I realized with horror that they weren't standing on the floor. They were hovering an inch above it, their feet not quite touching the ground. The first woman entered the room behind me, and the others followed, filling the doorway I'd just come through. "The house feeds on fear," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the cold room. "The more you're afraid, the warmer it gets. The warmer it gets, the longer it can keep you." I looked around desperately for another exit. There was a door on the far side of the room, beyond the fireplace. If I could just reach it, maybe I could find a way out, find a window, something. I ran for it. The figures around the room didn't try to stop me. They just watched, their heads turning in unison to follow my movement. I grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. On the other side was not another room, but the same living room I just tried to escape from. Same fireplace, same frozen windows, same hovering figures watching me with black eyes. I turned around. The doorway I'd entered through was gone. Just a solid wall where it had been moments before. "The house rearranges itself," the woman said from right behind me. I spun around, and she was there, inches away, her face so close I could smell her breath. It smelled like rot and cold earth. "It'll keep you running until you're too tired to run anymore, until you're too scared to think. And then it'll take what it needs." I shoved past her and ran toward the fireplace, thinking maybe I could climb up the chimney. But when I got close, the flames surged toward me like they were reaching out. The heat was intense, scorching, and I stumbled backward with my arms up to protect my face. All around the room, the figures started moving. Not toward me, but in circles, a slow, ritualistic dance around the perimeter. They were humming now, a low drone that vibrated in my chest, and the temperature in the room was rising. Not warm, hot, sweltering. The fire in the hearth grew larger, climbing up the chimney, spreading across the ceiling in rivers of flame that cast dancing shadows across the walls. I was sweating now, my coat suddenly suffocating. I tore it off and threw it aside, but the heat kept building. It felt like I was standing inside an oven, the air shimmering, the wallpaper starting to curl and blacken at the edges. The figures kept dancing, kept humming, and the woman with the sharp teeth stood in the center of the room, her arms raised, conducting them like an orchestra. "Give it your fear," she commanded. "Give it your warmth. Give the house what it needs to survive the cold." I was going to die here, in this impossible house that defied geometry and physics, burned by flames that gave no heat to the frozen air. I could feel consciousness slipping away, the heat and terror combining into something that was shutting my brain down piece by piece. Then I heard it, faint but distinct, a sound from outside, an engine. Through the frost-covered window, I saw headlights cutting through the storm. A snowplow moving slowly down the rural route, its orange lights flashing. The humming stopped. The figures stopped dancing. The woman's smile disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "No," she whispered. "Not yet. The house isn't finished." But whatever rules governed this nightmare place, apparently they didn't apply when real help was nearby. The walls started shaking, the floor tilting beneath my feet. The fire in the hearth went out instantly, plunging everything into darkness broken only by my phone's dying flashlight beam. I ran, not in any particular direction, just away from the figures that were starting to dissolve into shadows, their forms losing cohesion. I crashed through a doorway that hadn't been there a second ago and found myself in the front hallway, the door to the outside standing open, snow blowing in. I didn't question it. I ran through that door and off the porch, into the knee-deep snow, waving my arms at the snowplow that was passing by. The driver saw me, thank God, and stopped. He climbed down from the cab, asking what the hell I was doing out here, and I told him I'd been in that house, that something was wrong, that we needed to call for help. He looked at where I was pointing. The driveway was there, and so were my Jeep's tire tracks leading up to where the house should have been. But there was no house, just an empty snow-covered lot with the crumbling foundation of something that had burned down years ago, barely visible through the accumulation. The plow driver said this place had been abandoned since the 70s, that a farmhouse had stood here once but it caught fire during a blizzard and killed everyone inside. He asked if I was feeling okay, if maybe I'd hit my head or gotten turned around in the storm. I spent that night in a motel room in the next town, refusing to sleep, jumping at every sound. In the morning, I drove back to the site with a sheriff's deputy, and he confirmed what the plow driver had said. No house, just old foundation and snow. But in that snow, barely visible and already being covered by fresh flakes, were footprints. Dozens of them, circling the foundation in that same ritualistic pattern I'd seen the figures dancing. I moved to California 3 months later. Can't stand the cold anymore. Can't stand old houses or fireplaces or storms. And I never, ever stopped to ask for help at isolated places anymore, no matter how desperate I am, because some houses don't want to shelter you. They want to feed on you. And during a snowstorm, when the world is cut off and help is miles away, they'll take whatever warmth they can get. Story 4: The Boy in the Back Seat. Children's voices should never sound old. When they do, something has gone fundamentally wrong with the world. My name is Sarah Mendoza, and I was 29 when I learned that some things pretend to be children specifically because we're programmed to help them. This happened during a February snowstorm in 2023, on a stretch of Interstate 80 in Wyoming that I will never drive again as long as I live. I'd been visiting my parents in Cheyenne and was driving back to Salt Lake City where I worked as a pediatric nurse. The storm warnings had been rolling in all morning, but I thought I could beat it. I'd grown up in Wyoming. I knew how to drive in snow. I'd done this trip 100 times. Pride goes before a fall, my grandmother used to say. Pride goes before something much worse than a fall. The snow started around noon, and within an hour, visibility had dropped to almost nothing. I slowed down to 30 miles per hour, then 20, following the faint taillights of an 18-wheeler ahead of me. When even those disappeared into the white, I knew I needed to pull over. I found a rest stop, basically just a wide spot in the road with a couple of parking spaces and a snow-covered bathroom building. 3 other vehicles were already there. A pickup truck, a minivan, and a sedan, all sitting with their engines running, their exhaust rising white into the storm. I pulled into an empty spot and killed my engine to conserve gas. The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the wind screaming across the highway and rattling my Honda Civic like it was trying to shake me loose. I'd been sitting there maybe 10 minutes, scrolling through my phone's weather app and trying to figure out how long I'd be stuck, when I heard the tapping on my window. I jumped, my phone flying out of my hand. Standing outside in the storm was a small figure, a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing a thin jacket and jeans with no hat or gloves. He was knocking on my passenger window, his face pressed against the glass. My first instinct was horror. What was a kid doing out here in this weather? Where were his parents? I rolled down the passenger window about 2 inches, and the cold that rushed in was breathtaking. The boy looked up at me with huge dark eyes, his face pale and wet with melted snow. "I'm cold," he said. His voice was quiet, almost whispering. "Can I come in and get warm?" My nurse training kicked in immediately. Hypothermia, frostbite, potential neglect or abuse. I needed to get this kid warm and find his parents immediately. I unlocked the passenger door, and he climbed in without a word. The inside of my car was warm from the heater I'd been running, but when he settled into the seat, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. I could see my breath fogging in front of my face, even though the vents were still blowing hot air. "What's your name?" I asked, reaching for the blanket I kept in the back seat. "Where are your parents?" He didn't answer right away, just sat there, perfectly still, not shivering despite being soaked through from the snow. His hands rested in his lap, and I noticed his fingernails were blue. Not pale blue, but dark blue, almost purple, the color of severe oxygen deprivation. "My name is Michael," he said finally. His voice sounded wrong now that I was hearing it more clearly. Too deep for a child, with an odd cadence that didn't match the way kids usually talk. "My parents are gone." I wrapped the blanket around his shoulders and turned the heat up as high as it would go. "Gone where? Are they in one of the other cars?" He shook his head slowly. "Gone a long time ago. I've been waiting for someone to let me in." The way he said that made something cold slither down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I looked at him more carefully, really looked, and started noticing things that my panicked concern had overlooked. His clothes were wrong. Not just thin and inadequate for the weather, but old-fashioned. The jacket looked like something from the 1970s, with wide lapels and a pattern that hadn't been in style for decades. His jeans had that stiff, unbleached look of really old denim, and he still wasn't shivering, wasn't shaking at all, just sat there with his hands folded, looking straight ahead through my windshield at the storm. "Michael," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice calm, "how long have you been outside?" "Long time," he repeated. Then he turned his head to look at me, and I saw that his eyes weren't just dark. They were black, completely black, like someone had pushed holes through his head into nothing. "Since the accident, since the snow buried our car and we couldn't get out, since everyone else stopped breathing and went to sleep. But I didn't sleep. I waited. My hand found the door handle on instinct. Every alarm in my body was screaming at me to get out of this car immediately. This wasn't a lost child. This wasn't even a child at all. "I think you should get out now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll go find someone to help you." He smiled. It was the worst smile I'd ever seen on anything that looked remotely human. His teeth were gray, filed down to points, and there were too many of them, packed into his small mouth like rows of broken glass. "But I'm finally warm," he said. "Why would I leave when I'm finally warm?" He reached over and touched my hand. His fingers were ice cold, so cold it felt like they were burning my skin. I yanked my hand away, but the sensation lingered, spreading up my arm like frostbite in fast forward. "The others outside are empty now," he continued, still smiling that horrible smile. "They let me in their cars too. They wanted to help. They were so nice. And now they're all asleep just like my family. Just like you'll be soon." I looked out my window at the other vehicles in the rest stop. The pickup truck's windows were completely frosted over. So were the minivans. The sedan's engine wasn't running anymore, and snow was already piling up around it. "How many cars have stopped here tonight?" I whispered. "Lots," Michael said happily. "The storm brings them. Cold people looking for somewhere warm. I wait and they always let me in eventually, because I look like I need help. Because people are good and want to save children. His hand shot out faster than I would have thought possible and grabbed my wrist. The cold intensified, spreading from my arm into my chest, and I felt my heart rate starting to slow, my breathing getting shallow. "Don't fight it," he whispered, and his voice wasn't trying to sound like a child's anymore. It was ancient, hollow, the voice of something that had been waiting in the snow for longer than I could imagine. "It doesn't hurt. Everyone just goes to sleep. And then I get to be warm for a little while longer." I did the only thing I could think of. I laid on the horn with my free hand, holding it down, letting it blare out into the storm. The sound was deafening inside the small car, and Michael's smile disappeared. "Stop that," he hissed. I kept pressing the horn. Over and over, long, desperate blasts. Michael's grip on my wrist tightened, and I felt bones grinding together. The cold was spreading faster now, reaching toward my heart, and my vision was starting to tunnel. But I kept hitting that horn, kept making noise, kept hoping someone would hear. A door opened, the driver's side door of the pickup truck, the one with the frosted windows. A man stumbled out, his movements slow and clumsy, like someone waking from deep sleep. He looked around confused, then focused on my car and the sound of the horn. Michael's head snapped toward the movement, and his grip on my wrist loosened just slightly. I seized the moment and shoved my other hand toward the door handle, popping it open. The wind and snow roared in, but so did something else. Heat. Real heat. Not the fake warmth Michael had been leeching from me. He shrieked, a sound like metal scraping against metal, and let go of my wrist entirely. I fell out of the car into the snow, my arm numb and useless, and crawled away as fast as I could. The man from the pickup reached me, asking what was wrong, what was happening. I tried to tell him about Michael, about the thing in my car, but when we both looked back, my passenger seat was empty. Just an open door and snow blowing into the interior. No child. No wet footprints. Nothing but that blanket I'd wrapped around his shoulders, now covered in frost so thick it looked like it had been in a freezer for weeks. The man helped me to the pickup, which was still warm inside, and I saw there were two other people there already. A woman and a teenage girl, both looking confused and groggy, like they'd just woken up. None of them could remember falling asleep. They just remembered pulling over to wait out the storm, and then nothing until my horn woke them. We sat together in that truck until the snowplows came through 3 hours later. None of us went to check on the minivan or the sedan. We could see from where we were that both of them had their doors hanging open now, and the interiors were packed solid with snow, like they'd been sitting there abandoned for days instead of hours. The state police investigated later, and they found 3 frozen bodies. A family of 3 in the minivan, and an elderly man in the sedan. The medical examiner said they died of hypothermia, that they must have run out of gas and gotten trapped when their heaters stopped working. But their gas tanks weren't empty. Their engines had just been turned off. From the inside, the blanket from my car was never found, even though I saw the police bag it as evidence. It vanished from the evidence locker before anyone could examine it. The officer who told me this looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure he believed his own explanation. I don't drive in snowstorms anymore. Don't stop at rest stops. Don't roll down my window for anyone, especially if they're small and alone and look like they need help. Because I learned that night that some things are very, very good at looking helpless. They've had decades of practice, sometimes centuries, waiting in the cold places of the world for someone kind-hearted enough to let them in. And once you do, once that door opens and they're inside where it's warm, they don't ever want to leave. Story 5. The Static Man. Interstate 90 through Montana is one of those highways that makes you feel like you've fallen off the edge of civilization. Miles and miles of nothing, Just empty plains and distant mountains and the occasional gas station every 100 miles or so. That's where I met him. The man made of static. I'm Kylie Brenner, 33, and I'd been driving cross-country from Seattle to Chicago for a job interview. February probably wasn't the smartest time to attempt that drive, but I was broke and couldn't afford a plane ticket. So the Honda Accord and I set out on what I thought would be a 3-day adventure. Day 2 was when everything went wrong. The snow started just west of Billings, light at first, the kind of picturesque flurries that make you think winter is beautiful. By the time I was an hour past the city, it had turned into something biblical. The kind of storm where you can't tell if snow is falling from the sky or just being picked up from the ground and hurled sideways by wind that sounds like it's screaming. I should have pulled over, should have found a motel, should have done literally anything except what I actually did, which was keep driving because I was stubborn and scared of missing my interview. The highway turned into a white tunnel. I couldn't see the lines on the road, couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead, could barely even see my own hood. My windshield wipers were going full blast and achieving absolutely nothing. Every minute or so, a huge gust would hit the car hard enough to shove it sideways, and I'd have to fight the wheel to keep from sliding off into the ditch. That's when I saw the figure standing on the side of the highway. At first, I thought it was a person, someone stranded like me, needing help. But as I got closer and my headlights swept across him, I realized something was very, very wrong. He wasn't moving, not shifting his weight, not waving for help, not doing any of the things a normal person standing in a blizzard would do. Just standing there perfectly still, facing the road. And his body was flickering. That's the only way I can describe it. Like when a TV signal goes bad and you get that black and white static interference, except it was a person. His entire form kept dissolving into these patterns of black and white noise, then resolving back into a vaguely human shape, then dissolving again. I eased my foot off the gas, my car slowing to a crawl. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to speed up, to get past this thing and never look back. But I was transfixed, unable to look away from this impossible figure standing in the storm. As I drew level with him, his head turned, smoothly, mechanically rotating to face my car. Where his face should have been was just more static, that black and white pattern shifting and writhing, and somewhere in the middle of it I could almost make out features. Eyes, a mouth, but they kept changing, kept reforming into different configurations, like his face was cycling through every face that had ever existed. He raised one arm and pointed directly at me. The radio in my car, which had been off, suddenly blared to life. Not music, not even white noise, just this horrible static screech that felt like it was drilling into my skull. My headlights flickered. My dashboard lights strobed on and off. The engine started making a grinding sound it had never made before. I punched the accelerator, and the Honda lurched forward, back wheels fishtailing on the ice. In my rearview mirror, I saw the static man step onto the highway. Not walking exactly, more like gliding, his feet not quite touching the ground, moving in a way that didn't match any motion a human body should make. He was following me. My car topped out at maybe 40 miles per hour in those conditions, but he was keeping pace effortlessly. Just gliding along behind me, maybe 50 feet back, that arm still raised and pointing. The static pattern that made up his body was spreading, infecting the air around him, turning the snow near him into the same black and white interference pattern. The radio kept screeching, the sound changing pitch and rhythm like it was trying to form words. I reached down and yanked the power cable out completely, but the noise didn't stop. It was coming from the speakers, from the dashboard, from everywhere all at once. My phone screen lit up on its own, displaying nothing but static. The heating vents started blowing cold air that smelled like ozone and burnt plastic. Every electronic system in my car was going haywire, and that thing was getting closer. 40 feet now. 35. I could see it more clearly in my mirror now, and I wished I couldn't. The static was peeling away in sections, revealing what was underneath, and what was underneath was worse than the static. Raw red tissue, exposed nerves, muscle and sinew without skin, all of it flickering in and out of existence like a bad transmission. 20 feet. The entire highway behind me was dissolving into static now, the solid black asphalt turning into that same interference pattern, spreading out from the thing like a virus. The snow in the air was doing it too, individual flakes turning into tiny pixels of black and white before disappearing entirely. My engine sputtered. Once. Twice. No. If the car died out here with that thing bearing down on me, I was dead. Or worse than dead. Something about the way it moved, the way it was rewriting reality around it, told me that death would be the preferable option. I saw a sign flash past through the storm. Gas station, next exit 1 mile. I pushed the accelerator to the floor, and the Honda gave everything it had. The exit appeared like a gift from God, and I took it too fast, feeling the car start to spin. I turned into the skid, corrected, and somehow managed to stay on the road. The gas station was an old independent place, one of those mom-and-pop operations that looked like it had been sitting in the same spot since the 1950s. 2 pumps out front, a small building with a flickering neon sign that said, "Open," and most importantly, lights. Actual electric lights that cut through the storm like a promise of safety. I pulled up right in front of the door and killed the engine. For a long moment, I just sat there, hands shaking, heart trying to hammer its way out of my chest. The radio had gone silent. The dashboard lights were back to normal. Everything seemed fine. Then I looked in my rearview mirror. He was standing at the edge of the gas station's property, right where the parking lot met the highway, not coming any closer, but not leaving either. Just standing there, that arm still raised and pointing, that static body flickering and writhing. An elderly man opened the gas station door and called out to me, asking if I was okay. I practically fell out of my car and ran inside, not looking back, not wanting to see if the thing had moved closer. The inside of the gas station was warm and smelled like coffee and old linoleum. The old man's name was Harold, and he took one look at my face and asked if I'd seen something strange on the highway. I asked him what he meant. He said that sometimes, during bad storms, people reported seeing a figure out on the interstate. Different descriptions, but always the same basic story. A man-shaped thing that followed cars, that made electronics go haywire, that seemed to be made of television static or interference patterns. He said people who stopped and let it get too close were sometimes found in their cars days later, frozen solid, their eyes and mouths open but empty, like something had pulled everything out of them and left just the shell behind. Their radios would still be on, he said, still playing that static screech, even with dead batteries, even with the whole electrical system fried. He said the thing had been seen on this stretch of highway since the 1970s, always during storms, always following lone drivers. Some local kids had a name for it, the broadcast, like it was some kind of signal that had learned to exist in the physical world and was now hunting for new receivers. I stayed in that gas station for 6 hours, until the storm passed and the plows came through. Harold let me sleep in a back room and didn't charge me for the coffee I drank or the food I ate from his convenience store shelves. He was a kind man who understood that some things are real even when they shouldn't be. When I finally worked up the courage to leave, Harold walked me to my car. The thing was gone from the edge of the property, but as I started the engine, my radio came on by itself one last time. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to hear what sounded like words in the static. Next time, I drove the rest of the way to Chicago going 20 miles over the speed limit, even through the snow, even when it was stupid and dangerous. I didn't care. I just wanted off that highway. I didn't get the job. Arrived too late for the interview, looking like I'd seen a ghost, which I guess in a way I had. I moved back to Seattle a month later and haven't left the city since. Don't plan to either, because I learned something on that highway in Montana that I wish I didn't know. Sometimes storms don't just bring snow and wind and cold. Sometimes they bring things that have been waiting in the spaces between channels, in the dead air between radio stations, in all those empty frequencies where nothing should exist. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to be on the right stretch of road at the right time, those things find a way out. They find a signal strong enough to manifest. They find you. My phone still acts up sometimes. Even in Seattle, even in my apartment surrounded by people and noise and civilization. Late at night, I'll wake up and find it displaying nothing but static, and I'll hear that same screeching sound from the speakers before it cuts off. It's looking for me. I know it is. Searching through every broadcast, every signal, trying to find which receiver I'm near. I don't watch TV anymore. Don't listen to the radio. Try to use my phone as little as possible, because I'm terrified that one day I'll hear that static and it won't cut off. It'll keep going. And when I look at the screen, I'll see that same figure made of interference patterns, that same pointing arm. And this time, there won't be a gas station to run to. This time, I'll be alone in my apartment, doors locked, nowhere to go. And the broadcast will finally have found its receiver. Story 6. The Plow That Never Stopped. Not all rescue vehicles are trying to rescue you. This happened to me and my brother Jake in December of 2021, on a county road in northern Wisconsin that sees maybe 3 cars a day even in good weather. We'd been ice fishing at a remote lake, just the two of us doing our annual winter tradition, when a storm rolled in way faster than the weather service had predicted. My name is Aaron Duluth. I was 35 at the time, Jake was 31, and neither of us had the good sense God gave a doorknob, which is probably why we decided to drive home through what quickly became whiteout conditions instead of setting up in the ice shack and waiting it out. The Silverado handled the first 5 miles okay, but then we came around a bend and found ourselves facing a wall of snow so thick it was like hitting a curtain. Jake slammed on the brakes, the truck fishtailed, and we ended up perpendicular across both lanes, completely stuck in a drift that had piled up where the road dipped down. We tried rocking the truck back and forth, tried digging out the tires with our hands because we'd forgotten to bring a shovel, tried everything we could think of. Nothing worked. The snow was too deep, too heavy, and more was falling every second. Jake's phone was dead. Mine had 2% battery and no signal. We were 15 miles from the nearest town, on a road that probably wouldn't see a plow for hours, maybe not until morning. We sat in the truck with the engine running for heat and tried to figure out our options. We had maybe a quarter tank of gas, a couple of protein bars, some water bottles that were starting to freeze. If we rationed carefully and the storm passed soon, we'd probably be okay. That's when we saw the lights. 2 amber flashers cutting through the snow, accompanied by the rumble of a big diesel engine. A snowplow, coming from the direction we'd been headed, moving slow and steady, pushing a wave of white in front of it. Relief hit us like a physical force. We'd be saved, would get pulled out or given a ride to town, would be drinking hot coffee in a warm diner within the hour. The plow slowed as it approached our truck. It was one of those massive county trucks, bright orange with a big V-blade on the front and county maintenance, stenciled on the door in faded white letters. The cab was high up, and we could see the driver silhouetted against his own dashboard lights, but couldn't make out any features. The truck stopped about 20 feet from us, engine idling, flashers still spinning. We waited for the driver to get out, to come see if we needed help. He didn't move. After a full minute of this standoff, I opened my door and stepped out into the storm, waving my arms. The cold hit me immediately, vicious and cutting, but I pushed through it and walked toward the plow. "Hey!" I shouted over the wind. "We're stuck. Can you help us out?" The driver's head turned toward me, slow and smooth, and for just a second, The dashboard lights illuminated his face. It was wrong. All wrong. The features were there. Eyes, nose, mouth. But they were arranged in a way that made my brain stutter trying to process what I was seeing. Like someone had described what a human face should look like but had never actually seen one. Then he smiled, and I saw that his teeth went all the way back to his ears, row after row of them, way more than any mouth should hold. He revved the engine. Once, twice, a warning. I backed up slowly toward my truck, not taking my eyes off the plow. The driver's head swiveled to track my movement, still smiling that impossible smile. Then the plow lurched forward, not toward the snowbank blocking the road, toward us, toward our truck with Jake still inside. "Move!" I screamed, running now. Jake saw what was happening and threw the Silverado into reverse, but we were stuck, the tires just spinning uselessly. The plow accelerated, that massive blade lowered and aimed directly at the driver's side of our truck. It was going to plow right through us, metal and glass and flesh all the same to that indifferent blade. Jake dove across to the passenger side and threw that door open just as I reached it. We both fell out into the snow together, rolled away from the truck, and watched as the plow slammed into the Silverado with a sound like the end of the world. The impact crumpled the entire driver's side, caving it inward, shattering every window. The force of it pushed the truck sideways into the deeper snow at the edge of the road, burying it up to the windows. The plow backed up, its blade scraping against the ruined metal with a screech that cut through the storm. Then it turned, repositioned itself, and I realized with horror that it was lining up for another hit. It was going to keep hitting until our truck was nothing but scrap metal. We ran, left everything in the truck, our gear, our phones, our wallets, and just ran into the forest that lined the highway. The snow was deep enough that we had to high-step through it, our legs burning with the effort, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. Behind us, we heard the plow hit the truck again, and again, metal shrieking, glass exploding. Then the engine sound changed, got louder, and we realized it was coming after us. A snowplow, following us into the forest, where no plow should be able to go. But when I looked back, it was there, that orange monstrosity pushing through the trees like they were nothing, branches breaking and falling, snow flying up in huge sprays from the blade. And the driver was leaning out his window now, still smiling, watching us run. Jake and I split up without discussing it, some animal instinct telling us not to stay together, not to make ourselves a single target. I veered right, he went left, and the plow had to choose. Chose Jake. I stopped behind a thick pine tree and watched in horror as the plow turned to follow my brother, picking up speed, the blade pushing aside anything in its path. Jake was fast, always had been, but the plow was faster. Relentless, unstoppable. It was going to catch him, going to run him down in the woods where no one would ever find him. And there was nothing I could do about it. Then I saw the ravine, a natural depression in the land that dropped maybe 15 feet, steep and filled with snow. Jake was running straight toward it, and I realized he saw it too, was angling himself toward the edge. At the last second, he threw himself over the side, rolling and tumbling down in an avalanche of white. I held my breath, waiting to see him stand up, to see if he was okay. The plow didn't slow down. It went right over the edge after him. The front end tipped forward, and for a moment the whole truck was vertical, balanced on the edge of the ravine. Then gravity took over. It fell, cab first, crashing down into the bottom with an impact that shook snow from the trees around me. I ran to the edge and looked down. The plow was on its side, wheels still spinning, engine still running. The driver's door had been crushed in the fall, and there was no movement from the cab. Jake was 20 feet away, struggling to sit up, covered in snow but alive. We scrambled out of that ravine and made our way back to the road, neither of us speaking, just putting one foot in front of the other. The storm was starting to ease, and eventually we flagged down an actual plow, driven by an actual person with an actual human face who called for help on his radio. The police went looking for the orange plow later, found it at the bottom of the ravine exactly where it had fallen. But the cab was empty. No driver, no blood, no sign anyone had ever been inside. And when they ran the vehicle identification numbers, they found that particular plow had been decommissioned and sent to a scrapyard in 1987, 34 years before it tried to kill us. The mechanic who examined it said the engine shouldn't have been running, that it was seized solid, hadn't been operational in decades. Said there was no fuel in the tank, no oil in the engine, nothing that would explain how it had driven at all, let alone chased us through the woods. We don't go ice fishing anymore, Jake and I. Don't drive on rural roads in winter. Don't trust the friendly amber lights of county vehicles coming to help. Because we learned that night that not everything with flashing lights and official colors is there to rescue you. Sometimes they're there to make sure you never leave the storm at all. Story 7. The Frozen Voices. Emma Chin here. I was 26 when I discovered that sometimes, when the temperature drops low enough and the snow falls thick enough, voices get trapped. Frozen mid-scream, preserved like insects in amber, waiting for someone to thaw them out. This was in January of 2022, in the mountains outside of Banff, Alberta. I'd rented a cabin for a week of solo writing retreat, trying to finish my novel away from all distractions. The cabin was perfect, isolated on 20 acres of forest. No neighbors for miles, nothing but silence and snow. The storm hit on my third night there. The weather service had mentioned it, but like an idiot, I'd figured I could weather anything in a sturdy cabin with a generator and plenty of supplies. By midnight, the wind was howling so loud it sounded like the world was ending. Snow piled up against the windows so fast I could watch it rising, inch by inch, minute by minute. The power went out around 1 a.m., and when I tried starting the generator, nothing happened. The cold started seeping in immediately, and I knew I was in serious trouble. I wrapped myself in every blanket I could find and huddled near the fireplace, feeding it every piece of wood I could reach without going outside to the woodshed. The temperature inside the cabin dropped steadily, my breath turning into thick clouds, frost forming on the inside of the windows. That's when I started hearing the voices. First, I thought it was the wind, just the storm making strange sounds as it whipped around the cabin. But the more I listened, the more I could make out actual words. Not sentences exactly, just fragments. Snippets of conversation coming from outside the walls. Help me, please. So cold, can't feel. Don't leave me here. I told myself I was imagining it. That isolation and cold and fear were combining to make me hear things that weren't there. But the voices got louder, more distinct, and I realized they were coming from specific locations. One from near the front door, another from the back window, a third from somewhere underneath the cabin, muffled by floorboards. They weren't speaking in any pattern, just random phrases, repeated over and over, like recordings playing on a loop. It's in the snow. Watching from the trees. We never should have stopped. I got up from the fireplace, wrapped in my blanket cocoon, and moved to the front window. The voice there was clearest, and I pressed my ear against the cold glass to hear better. Let me in where it's warm. My blood ran cold. That phrase. I'd heard it before, read it in old local legends about the mountains. Stories of winter spirits that would mimic human voices, luring travelers off the path and into the trees where they'd freeze to death. But these didn't sound like spirits. They sounded real, human, desperate. I scraped frost off the window and peered outside. The storm had edged slightly, and in the dim light from my dying fire, I could see shapes in the snow. Not moving, just standing. 5 or 6 of them, scattered around the clearing where the cabin sat. They looked like people, frozen solid, covered in ice and snow, but definitely human-shaped. Their mouths were open, and I realized with a jolt of pure horror that the voices were coming from them, from their frozen mouths, still speaking even though their bodies had been dead for God knows how long. I stumbled back from the window, my heart trying to climb out of my throat. This wasn't possible. Dead people don't talk. Frozen corpses don't call out for help. But the voices kept coming, louder now, more insistent. Please, I'm so scared. It's getting closer. Oh God, it's here. That last one made me stop moving. It's here. Not it was here, past tense. Present tense. Like whatever they'd been afraid of was still out there. I forced myself back to the window and looked again. The frozen figures hadn't moved, but there was something else in the clearing now. Something tall and wrong, moving between the trees at the edge of the property. It was made of snow, or it wore snow, couldn't tell which, but it was huge, maybe 8 feet tall, and its movements were all wrong, too fluid, too graceful for something that size. It would appear between one tree, then vanish, then reappear between 2 different trees, like it was skipping the space in between. And every time it moved, the frozen voices would change. It sees me. Running, but it's faster. God, no, please no. I realized what I was hearing. The last moments of these people's lives, frozen into the air itself by the extreme cold, playing over and over like a terrible loop. They'd all died here, in this clearing, and their terror had been preserved in the ice and snow, waiting to be heard again. The thing made of snow stopped moving. It stood at the edge of the clearing, and even though it had no visible eyes, I knew it was looking at the cabin, looking at me. The voices all started speaking in unison now, words overlapping. Don't let it in. Lock the doors. It pretends to be human. I ran through the cabin, checking every lock, every window latch, even though I knew it was probably useless. If this thing could kill 5 or 6 people in the same spot, a locked door wasn't going to stop it. Then came the knocking. Soft at first, almost polite. 3 gentle taps on the front door. I didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there in my blanket cocoon, barely breathing. The knocking came again, harder now. Then a voice, speaking through the door. Emma? Are you okay in there? I'm from the ranger station. The storm knocked out communications, and we're checking on everyone in the area. It knew my name. How did it know my name? Emma, I need to know you're safe. Can you open the door, please? The voice sounded so normal, so human. If I hadn't seen the thing made of snow, if I hadn't heard the frozen voices warning me, I might have opened the door. I know you're scared, the voice continued. The storm does strange things to people, makes them see things that aren't there. But I'm real, Emma. I'm here to help. Just unlock the door. The frozen voices outside were screaming now, all of them, a chorus of terror. Don't. It lies. Stay inside. I backed away from the door, and that's when I noticed the temperature. It had dropped even further, impossibly cold, and frost was spreading across the inside of the door. Not natural frost. This moved deliberately, creating patterns, creating words. Let me in. Let me in. Let me in. The doorknob started turning on its own. Slowly, testing the lock. I grabbed the fireplace poker, the only weapon I had, and backed toward the far corner of the cabin. The fire had died down to embers, giving almost no light, and the darkness was getting deeper with every second. The doorknob stopped turning. The knocking stopped. The voice went silent. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of wind and those frozen voices outside, still screaming their warnings. Then every window in the cabin exploded inward at once. not broken by rocks or impacts, just exploded, glass flying everywhere, and through the openings poured snow. Not regular snow falling naturally, but directed, purposeful, flowing into the cabin like living water. The snow formed shapes as it came, human shapes but wrong. Too tall, too thin, joints bending in directions they shouldn't. They surrounded me, these snow figures, their faces featureless and blank, and they all reached toward me at once. Their touch was agony. Not just cold, but the complete absence of heat, the total removal of warmth from wherever they made contact. One of them grabbed my arm, and I felt my skin freezing solid, ice crystals forming in my blood. I swung the fireplace poker wildly, and when it connected with one of the figures, it exploded into powder. But there were so many of them, and I was weakening, the cold spreading from where they'd touched me, my movements getting slower. One of them pressed its featureless face close to mine, and I heard that voice again, coming from nowhere and everywhere. You'll join the others. Your voice will freeze too. You'll scream forever in the snow. I had maybe seconds left before I lost consciousness, before I froze like the people outside. In desperation, I threw myself toward the fireplace and shoved my frozen arm directly into the embers. The pain was incredible, but it was also heat. Real heat. Life-saving heat. The snow figures recoiled like I'd attacked them with acid. They flowed back toward the broken windows, retreating from the warmth, and I fed more wood into the embers, coaxing them back into flames. As the fire grew, the snow figures dissolved, and the temperature in the cabin started rising. Not much, but enough. Enough to stay alive. I kept that fire burning all night, feeding it everything I could find. Furniture, books, even parts of the cabin walls when the wood ran out. I didn't care if I burned the whole structure down as long as that fire kept going. The storm passed around dawn. In the morning light, I could see the frozen bodies clearly. 6 people, scattered around the clearing, their mouths still open in silent screams. When the morning warmed enough, the voices finally faded, released from their icy prison, and the clearing went blessedly quiet. Search and rescue found me 8 hours later. I was hypothermic, severely frostbitten on my arm, and babbling about voices and snow monsters. They treated me like I'd hallucinated the whole thing, said isolation and cold can do terrible things to the mind. But they couldn't explain the 6 frozen bodies around the cabin. Couldn't explain why all 6 had died in the same spot over the course of different years. Their deaths never connected until now. Couldn't explain the strange patterns of frost inside the cabin that looked almost like writing. I moved to Miami after that, as far south as I could get, because I learned something in those mountains that I can never unlearn. When the cold gets deep enough, when the snow falls thick enough, sound itself can freeze. Voices can be trapped. And sometimes, what's waiting in that cold isn't content to just watch you freeze. Sometimes it wants to add your voice to the chorus, to make you scream forever in the snow, a warning to the next person foolish enough to face the storm alone. Story 8. The Convoy. Sam Martinez, 40 years old, truck driver for 18 years. I've driven through every kind of weather you can imagine, from hurricanes in Florida to ice storms in Michigan. I thought I'd seen everything winter could throw at a person. I was wrong. March of 2023, I was hauling a load of electronics from Denver to Minneapolis, running a day behind schedule because of some warehouse mix-up. The weather was supposed to be clear, but in the Rockies, supposed to be doesn't mean a damn thing. The snow started around 7 p.m., just as I was crossing into Wyoming on I-80. Within an hour, it was a full-blown blizzard, the kind that makes you wonder if you're going to see morning. But I'm stubborn and stupid, so I kept going, figuring I'd make it to the next truck stop before things got really bad. That's when I saw the first truck. Another 18-wheeler, sitting on the shoulder with its hazards on, hood buried in a snowbank. I started to slow down, planning to check if the driver needed help, when I saw the second truck, and the third, and the fourth. 5 big rigs, all pulled over within a quarter-mile of each other, all with their hazards flashing. No drivers visible in any of the cabs. Something about the scene made my skin crawl. It looked staged, arranged, like someone had carefully positioned these trucks as a warning or a trap. I kept driving, giving them a wide berth, and that's when I heard it on the CB radio. A voice crackling through the static. "Breaker, breaker, this is Highway Watch. All trucks in the vicinity form up in convoy for safety. I repeat, form convoy immediately." I'd never heard of a Highway Watch before, and the voice sounded wrong. Too formal, too precise, like someone reading from a script they'd memorized but didn't understand. More voices came through, other truckers responding. "Copy that, Highway Watch. Where's the assembly point? What's your 20 Highway Watch? Anyone actually see this Highway Watch guy?" The original voice cut back in. "All trucks proceed eastbound. Follow my lights. Safety in numbers during storm conditions. Company procedure requires convoy formation." Company procedure. But which company? Every trucker out here worked for different outfits, and none of them had any kind of policy about mystery convoy formations in blizzards. I picked up my CB handset, about to ask what the hell was going on, when I saw the lights ahead. A huge truck, bigger than any civilian rig I'd ever seen, with lights running all along the trailer, front to back. Red and white lights, dozens of them, pulsing in sequence like some kind of hypnotic pattern. Despite every instinct telling me this was wrong, I found myself slowing down, falling in line behind it. And behind me, I heard the rumble of other trucks doing the same. Through my mirrors, I could see them appearing out of the storm, one by one, forming a line. We were creating a convoy, following the big rig with the lights. The voice came back on the CB. "Good. Maintain current speed. Stay in formation. Everything will be fine as long as you stay in formation." That last phrase sent a chill down my spine. It sounded like a threat disguised as reassurance. I looked more carefully at the truck I was following. Something was off about its proportions. The trailer was too long, maybe 60 feet when standard trailers are 53. And there were no company markings anywhere, just those hypnotic lights running along its length. "Hey," I said into the CB. "What company are you with, Highway Watch? I don't recognize your rig." Silence. Then, "All trucks maintain speed. Do not break formation. Breaking formation is dangerous during storm conditions." He hadn't answered my question. I glanced in my mirrors again. There were 6 trucks behind me now, all of them following in a perfect line, their headlights creating a chain of light through the storm. And beyond them, more trucks were joining, appearing out of the white like ships emerging from fog. "Anyone else think this is weird?" I said into the CB. A woman's voice responded, "Yeah, I've been driving for 20 years and never heard of any Highway Watch. What the hell are we doing?" "Maintaining safety," the original voice cut in. "Please refrain from unnecessary communication. Maintain speed. Stay in formation." I made a decision. Fuck this. Whatever was happening here, I wanted no part of it. I signaled right and started to ease toward the shoulder, planning to drop out of the convoy and take my chances alone in the storm. The instant I left the formation, 2 things happened. First, the hypnotic lights on the lead truck all turned toward me. Not the whole trailer, just the lights, swiveling in their sockets to point directly at my cab, bathing me in this red and white strobe that made my eyes hurt and my head swim. Second, the truck behind me accelerated, closing the gap I'd created, boxing me in so I couldn't pull over. Resume formation. the voice said, and there was no mistaking the threat now. Breaking formation during convoy is prohibited. I tried pulling left, away from the shoulder, but the truck in front of me slowed down, and the one behind me sped up, trapping me between them. They were hurting me, keeping me in line whether I wanted to be there or not. On the CB, I heard other drivers starting to panic. I can't slow down. My brakes aren't responding. The steering wheel won't turn. What the fuck? My dashboard is going haywire. Nothing's working. My own dashboard started flickering. Speedometer spinning randomly. Fuel gauge dropping to empty and then jumping to full. Warning lights illuminating in patterns that didn't make sense. And my foot was on the brake, pressing down hard, but my speed wasn't decreasing. If anything, I was going faster. The convoy was accelerating. All of us, locked together, picking up speed in the middle of a blizzard where visibility was maybe 30 feet. Highway watch, our trucks aren't responding. Someone screamed into the CB. What's happening? Maintain formation, the voice repeated, and I could hear something else now underneath it. Not quite laughter, but something close. Maintain speed. We're almost at the collection point. Collection point. The lead truck's lights flashed brighter, and through them I could see something emerging from the storm ahead. Not a truck stop or a town, but a break in the guardrail, a gap that led straight off the highway and into darkness. He's going over, the woman from earlier shouted. He's driving off the fucking road. And he was. The lead truck turned toward the gap, and we were all following, locked in this convoy formation, unable to break free, unable to stop. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my fire extinguisher from its mount, aimed it at my dashboard, and discharged it directly into the controls. The freezing CO2 blasted across my instruments, and something sparked, something fried, and suddenly my foot on the brake meant something again. My truck started to slow. The rig behind me slammed into my trailer with a screech of metal, but I kept my foot down, kept braking, and finally managed to wrench my steering wheel to the right, forcing myself out of the convoy. I watched through my window as the rest of them went over. 6, 7, 8 big rigs, all following the lead truck with the hypnotic lights, all disappearing over the edge of the highway and into whatever was down there. I brought my truck to a stop on the shoulder, my hands shaking so hard I could barely unbuckle my seatbelt. The storm was starting to clear, and in the growing visibility, I could see the gap in the guardrail where the convoy had gone over. I walked to it on shaking legs and looked down. There was no ravine, no cliff, just flat ground about 10 feet below the highway, an old access road covered in snow, and no trucks, no wreckage, no debris, nothing. Just undisturbed snow stretching away into the distance. 8 18-wheelers had driven off the highway right in front of me, and they'd simply vanished. I called 911, and the state police arrived an hour later. They found tire tracks leading off the highway, leading down to that access road, but those tracks only went about 50 feet before stopping abruptly, like the trucks had just evaporated. They searched for 2 days. Helicopters, search teams, the whole works. Found nothing. No trucks, no drivers, no trace of anyone or anything. 6 drivers were declared missing. Their families are still looking for answers. I quit trucking 3 months later. Couldn't handle being on the road anymore. Couldn't trust the CB radio or other drivers, or the stretch of empty highway disappearing into darkness. Because I learned something that night that I wish I could forget. Sometimes in snowstorms, things appear that aren't quite real. Things that look right enough to fool you, sound right enough to make you follow. And if you follow too long, if you let yourself be herded into formation, you end up somewhere that isn't on any map. Somewhere you can't come back from. Story 9. The Emergency Broadcast. My name is Jessica Park, and I'm 28 years old. What happened to me last February during the Valentine's Day blizzard is something I'm still trying to understand, even now, months later. I was house-sitting for my aunt in rural New Hampshire, a big old farmhouse that sat at the end of a dirt road about 5 miles from the nearest town. My aunt and uncle had gone to Florida for 2 weeks, and I'd volunteered to watch their place, feed their cats, make sure the pipes didn't freeze. I work remotely as a web developer, so the isolation didn't bother me. In fact, I was looking forward to the quiet. The storm hit on February 13th, a day earlier than predicted. By evening, there was already a foot of snow on the ground and more coming down so thick I couldn't see the barn that was only 50 yards from the house. I settled in with my laptop and a cup of tea, listening to the wind howl and feeling cozy despite the storm raging outside. Around 8 p.m., the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Power outages were common out here, and my aunt had left instructions about the generator. I found it in the basement, followed the directions, and managed to get it running. The lights came back on, weaker than before but enough to see by. That's when the TV turned itself on. I hadn't been watching it, hadn't even touched it, but suddenly it was on, showing nothing but static, that black and white interference pattern with the hissing sound that used to fill dead channels before everything went digital. I reached for the remote to turn it off, and before I could press the button, the static cleared. A message appeared on the screen in those old-style amber letters on a blue background. Emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. I froze. Emergency broadcasts didn't just appear on TVs that weren't even on. They came through with sounds, with specific tones, with warnings about what kind of emergency was happening. This was just text. No sound except for a faint humming coming from the TV speakers, so low I almost didn't notice it. The message changed. Severe winter storm warning. Seek shelter immediately. Do not go outside under any circumstances. I was already sheltering, already inside, so this seemed redundant, but the specificity of that last line bothered me. Under any circumstances, like they knew someone might have a reason to go outside and wanted to make absolutely sure you didn't. The message changed again. If you hear someone calling from outside, do not answer. Do not open your doors. They are not who they sound like. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a normal emergency broadcast. This was something else entirely. The text kept scrolling. If you see movement in the snow, close your blinds. Turn off your lights. Stay quiet. I grabbed my phone to call 911 to report this weird broadcast, but there was no signal. Just the no service message that meant the cell tower was either down or too far away to reach in these conditions. The TV screen went black. Then it came back with a new message. It knows you're watching. I turned the TV off, physically pulled the plug out of the wall to make sure it couldn't turn itself back on. My heart was racing, and I told myself this was some kind of prank, some hacker thing, nothing real. Then I heard the scratching. It came from the back door, a soft scraping sound like fingernails on wood. Slow, deliberate, patient. I moved to the kitchen and looked at the back door. Through the small window at the top, I could see nothing but darkness and snow. The scratching continued, moving lower, like whatever was making it was slowly descending the door. I backed away, and that's when I heard my aunt's voice. "Jessica? Honey, can you let me in? I forgot my keys." It sounded exactly like her. The same tone, the same slight accent, the exact way she said my name. But my aunt was in Florida. I talked to her on the phone just that morning. "Jessica, it's cold out here. Please open the door." I didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there in the kitchen, barely breathing. "I know you're in there. I can hear you. Why won't you help me?" The voice was getting angry now, losing that sweet tone, taking on an edge that my aunt had never used with me. "Open the door, Jessica." I ran to the living room, grabbed my laptop, and tried to open it to send an email, to contact someone, to do anything. But it wouldn't turn on. Dead, even though it had been fully charged. The scratching moved to the front door now, and with it came more voices. My uncle, Jessica? What's wrong with you? Let us in. My best friend from college, Jess, I'm worried about you. Please open up. My mother, who lived 3 states away. Baby, you're scaring me. Open the door. All of them, all speaking in voices that sounded perfect, that sounded exactly right, asking me to open the door in increasingly desperate tones. I closed all the blinds like the TV had told me to, turned off every light in the house except for one small lamp in the upstairs bathroom. I locked myself in that bathroom and sat in the bathtub with a kitchen knife I'd grabbed on the way up, my whole body shaking. The voices continued for hours, cycling through everyone I'd ever known, everyone I'd ever cared about, all of them outside in a blizzard, all of them begging me to let them in. Around midnight, they stopped asking nicely. The scratching turned into pounding. Every door, every window, all of them being struck at once with enough force to make the whole house shake. And the voices started screaming. Not words anymore, just sounds. Raw, inhuman sounds that couldn't have come from human throats. I sat in that bathtub with my hands over my ears, crying, praying, doing anything to drown out those sounds. The pounding went on for what felt like hours. Then suddenly silence. Complete and absolute silence. No wind, no pounding, no voices, nothing. I sat there for a long time, afraid to move, afraid to check if it was really over. Eventually, dawn light started filtering through the bathroom window, pale and gray. I crept downstairs. Every door was intact, every window unbroken. But on the inside of the front door, written in frost, were words. Next time, you'll open it. The power came back on around noon. My phone got signal back. Everything returned to normal like nothing had happened. When my aunt and uncle returned from Florida, I told them I'd had a quiet 2 weeks. I didn't mention the broadcast, the voices, any of it. What would I even say? But I did some research later. Found archived newspaper articles from that area going back decades. And I found a pattern. Every few years, during the worst snowstorms, people reported strange emergency broadcasts on their TVs. Messages warning them not to go outside, not to answer voices, not to open their doors. And some people didn't listen. Some people opened their doors when they heard their loved ones calling. Those people were always found after the storm passed, frozen solid just outside their homes, their faces locked in expressions of absolute terror, their hands reaching toward the door they'd opened. The autopsies always showed the same thing. They hadn't died from the cold. They died from something else, something that had stopped their hearts instantly, something so frightening their bodies had simply given up. I still watch storms on TV, still get emergency broadcasts when bad weather is coming. But now I always check to make sure they're real, that they're coming from actual broadcast stations, that the messages make sense. Because I learned that night that some emergency broadcasts aren't warnings about the weather. They're warnings about what the weather brings with it. Finally, these stories are all true. 9 different people, 9 different snowstorms, 9 different encounters with things that shouldn't exist but do when the world turns white and the temperature drops below the point where reality works the way it's supposed to. If you live in snow country, you already know this. You already know that storms bring more than just cold and white. They bring silence and isolation and something else. Something that waits in that silence, that thrives in that isolation. Maybe it's different things in different places. Maybe it's all the same thing wearing different faces. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that when the snow starts falling hard enough, when the wind starts howling loud enough, when you find yourself alone and cut off from the rest of the world, you remember these stories. You remember to stay inside, to keep your doors locked, To ignore voices calling your name, no matter how familiar they sound. Because some things only come out in snowstorms. And once they know where you are, once they've found you alone and vulnerable and far from help, they don't stop trying. They just wait for the next storm. And the next one after that. Patient and persistent and cold as the grave. Stay safe out there. Stay warm. And when you hear scratching at your door during a blizzard, when you hear your name being called by someone who shouldn't be there, remember, it's not who it sounds like. It's never who it sounds like.